My parents joined the Mormon church when I was 3 years old in Phoenix, Arizona. We were poor. My father had a difficult time providing for us. We were used to being evicted. But our church community took care of us. You know how sometimes church congregations adopt a family for Christmas because otherwise that family might not have a Christmas? That was our family. My parents divorced when I was a teenager. My father struggled to provide support. So as the oldest of 4 children, I mowed lawns and delivered pizza, while my mother did sewing and alterations out of the little old modified farm shack of a house we rented. And we felt grateful for months. We only had to rely on our church for help with just food. My church gave me friends, community, and role models. It gave me hope of what a stable family could look like. As a 19-year-old, I served 2 years as a full-time missionary in Barcelona, Spain, as I dedicated 60 to 70 hours each week striving to bring people unto Christ through baptism and confirmation. I had many spiritual experiences. As I taught, contemplated scriptures, prayed, and performed ordinances like baptisms, I sensed a deep connection in my heart. Love, peace, joy, the fruits of the Spirit, a swelling warmth in my being. I attributed meanings to these experiences as if they were metaphorical vines that intertwined around my heart. The primary meaning was that these experiences were from God, giving me reliable divine witnesses of the truthfulness of the things I was teaching and reading, and that I was doing God's work. Approaching the end of my mission, I found myself in a deep internal struggle. I needed to know for sure whether the offering of my mission was acceptable to God. So I fasted and I prayed for several days, pleading in prayer for an answer. One evening, I found myself sitting on a couch in a small, humble apartment living room of a family we had recently taught and baptized, where I felt like I received my sacred answer from God. The mother of the family asked me to read her journal entry of the day of her baptism, and as I read it, I felt a softening in my chest, a warmth in my heart. Tears streamed down my face as almost audible words came to me that for me, the purpose of this life is to live with gratitude for the opportunity to participate in the lives of others, and that whether or not my mission was an acceptable offering was the wrong question because that was about me instead of about God and others. Our ministering presence to this humble family in their time of spiritual need, once strangers but now holding hands as brothers and sisters in Christ, amplified that gratitude in my being. With this experience, I intertwined and interlayered additional vines and layers of meaning around my heart, that my church was true, that I was the child of a God who loved me, and I knew my place in the universe. For the following 3 decades of my life, I had many experiences like these. For example, as a Sunday school teacher, in preparing my lessons, I prayed to God that I might be an instrument in His hands to touch the lives of my class members. On Sundays, with a prayer in my heart, I greeted those class members as they entered the room, and I often felt led by God in the things that I taught. Many times, members approached me after class to express that they really needed specific things that were part of that day's discussion, sometimes even as answers to their prayers. I experienced a constant positive feedback loop of these kinds of experiences, and also serendipitous experiences that happened during my life, for which I continually intertwined and interlayered additional vines and layers of meaning. Nonetheless, the primary meaning I attributed was that these spiritual experiences represented reliable divine witnesses of the truthfulness of my church and its teachings. Now, I should say that over the years, I encountered many things that challenged my testimony and triggered dissonance for me. Things like conflicts in scriptures that I couldn't reconcile, or problematic teachings from church leaders that violated my conscience, things that I couldn't reconcile with what I understood about science and history. I applied critical thinking to other areas of my life, but with regard to my faith, I set those irreconcilable problems aside as if books on a metaphorical shelf, in faith that God would provide me further light and knowledge about them someday. But over time, my shelf grew massive. It was heavy laden and sagging. Nonetheless, the cumulative intertwined vines and layers around my heart had grown into my heart. offering me such a sense of certainty that it prevented me from allowing my metaphorical shelf to collapse. My beliefs, my community, my roles, my reputation, my family connections, how I made sense of life were completely enmeshed in my personal sense of identity and these intertwined vines and layers of meaning around my heart that eventually became one with my heart. Then 6 years ago, our 22-year-old son came out to us as gay. In my church, the only valid paths for him would be to live a completely celibate life, painfully absent comprehensive love, or to live in a mixed orientation marriage, also without full capacity for comprehensive love for him or for his wife. Deep in my heart, the God I knew wouldn't want my son to live a life painfully absent the kinds of comprehensive love that my wife and I share. I couldn't metaphorically shelf that depth of cruelty as coming from the God I knew. So that evening, I anxiously searched online for resources as to how a believer could support a gay son. In my search on my church's website, I accidentally stumbled across what are called the church history gospel topics essays that discuss topics I had always led to believe were anti-church lies. As it turns out, they weren't lies. They were just history. I consumed the balance of my church's 13 essays that evening, and with that information, I recognized that many of my treasured spiritual experiences had confirmed the truthfulness of many partially or entirely false things as I understood them. It also seemed to me that during my church's history, its leaders routinely lacked the capacity to discern between their own biases and prejudices and actual inspiration from God. The deepest meanings that I attributed to my spiritual experiences as reliable divine witnesses of truth hadn't only proven false for me, but they also seemed to prove false for the leaders of my church too. I also learned that night that the leaders of my church knew this information, and to protect faith, they excluded it from lesson manuals, and they often took retributive actions against scholars who published about it. It violated my core values. I sensed a deep betrayal in my heart. But the most painful was I recognized that my spiritual experiences weren't what I thought they were. This combined recognition shattered my heavy shelf. All the irreconcilable problems and dissonance that I accumulated over the decades lie in a pile of scattered broken pieces on the floor. Also, in those very moments, all the intertwined vines and layers of meaning around my heart that became one with my heart were abruptly and violently ripped from me, leaving my heart a shredded, bloody, tangled mess. My very identity in those moments became an empty void. The heavens closed, and it was as if the God I always knew never existed in the first place, notwithstanding my cries out to him in those very moments. I later learned that what I experienced that night is often referred to as the dark night of the soul. But for me, it was more than one night. For the following 3 days, I consumed large volumes of information to try to make sense of what I had discovered. I anxiously tried to figure out how to make my church true again. But the more I studied, the less true it became for me. For the following weeks, I spent hours and hours in prayer, pleading with God for help, and nothing. I spent hours in scriptures. I counseled with my church leader, and he gave me a formal priesthood blessing, and nothing. I spent hours every day reading church apologetics, listening to podcasts to try to make sense of things. During those weeks, I cried myself to sleep most nights. My wife sometimes found me ugly crying on our bed, and she enveloped me in her arms to console me. The dissonance was soul-crushing. Sometimes it hurt to breathe. One day after having attended church, my heart raced, and the pain was so severe that I lied down on our bedroom floor with my hands on my chest to try to slow my breathing. And overwhelming thoughts came to me. that if I could just stop breathing, maybe the pain could end. My mind instantly hatched a plan of how to make the pain end without leaving a mess for my wife so that she wouldn't have to sell our home. It terrified me. I didn't feel like myself, like I was a hollow person. I didn't fully recognize the person in the mirror. Maybe that's why God wouldn't answer me. Am I even the same person? I felt like I was going insane. With increasing desperation, I asked people around me for help, but no one seemed to be able to help me. Not even my dear wife. She could see I was falling apart and asked me to find a therapist or a group that might help me, but who could that even be in Billings, Montana? With all the anguish of my soul, God, I need you. Help me. There had to be someone. Where were they? I became an unsafe person for my church community because I asked questions about those essays. Several members of my community started referring to me as the apostate. Others spread rumors that I had committed some grievous sin and that I was under Satan's power. Maybe my wife should leave me. While there were a few who reached out to me to see if I was okay, most didn't. It was devastating. My heart, a shredded mess. My God abandoned me, and I lost my community. Then one day, I stumbled across a Facebook support group that might be able to help me, and I introduced myself with vulnerability. And like in the parable of the Good Samaritan, with me as the wounded traveler, members of that group reached out through the internet to hold me in my grief. It just so happened that a member from that group named Lindsay was visiting her best friend in Billings, Montana. Lindsay messaged me and she invited me to breakfast the next morning. And so over breakfast, I sat with Lindsay and I shared my full story in person for the very first time with someone who could fully hold it. And like a Good Samaritan, with a ministry of presence, Lindsay held my story as if it were the most important she had ever heard, even though she had heard hundreds like mine. She didn't try to fix me. She didn't tell me I was wrong. She didn't try to reconcile the irreconcilable. She just offered a grace and ministry of presence. Lindsay assured me, "You've got this. You've got all the tools. It feels like you're sinking in quicksand, but you're actually standing on solid ground. The grief you feel is what will burn the ground to prepare it for new growth, and you get to decide what that is." And somehow, I believed Lindsay. And she gave me a temporary reprieve from my 7-week-long dark night of the soul. I later learned that Brene Brown refers to what Lindsay did as the ministry of presence, or holding the hand of a stranger. I didn't know this at that time. All I knew is that what I experienced with Lindsay that morning is something that needed to exist in the world. And whatever it was, not only did I need more of it, I needed to be a part of it. What Lindsay did hinted ever so slightly at that moment of grace from my mission, that answer, that gratitude, the holding hands. About a month after I met with Lindsay, I drove to Salt Lake City to attend a dinner with members of that Facebook group where she found me. At that dinner, I asked my new friend, Jera Lee, "Will I feel it again? Will I feel God again?" She said, "I don't know, Anthony. Everyone's journey is different, but regardless, we are here for you." The next day, I attended a faith crisis support workshop, and for the balance of the week, I attended a symposium, going to every session I could related to things I had been experiencing. And I found people just like me. And I found more of that ministering presence, strangers who held my hand, and they held me in their arms, just like Lindsay did. And things began to shift inside of me as my heart began to heal from the trauma And I began to feel that transcendent connection and grace in my being once more. But it was too triggering to call it God, so I didn't intertwine any vines or layers of meaning to it. I drove home from that week completely out of my 3-month-long dark night of the soul. I wished that my church community could have done for me what that week did for me, but they couldn't. I soon discovered that I wasn't alone in Billings, Montana. Several of my friends were traversing the same thing I was, so I created a local support group that continues to grow to this day. Members of our group, we've each put in significant work to understand what happened to us, and we strive to support each other with grace and a ministry of presence. We support each other across an entire spectrum of belief without any agenda of where individual faith journeys will end. In our group, regardless of what we each leave behind or the depths of the unknown we have traversed, as we each step forward into human experience with exploration and discovery, we are not alone. While for me, my process is ongoing and there are scars, with the help of others, my heart has healed. For me, my choice, rather than intertwining new vines and layers of meaning, I allow my transcendent, connecting, grace-filled experiences to exist in their purity, with curiosity and with gratitude. This work of supporting others, it's how I thrive now. In some ways, it links back to that moment, half a world away, sitting on a couch in a humble apartment living room, reading that journal entry. I strive to live my life with gratitude for the opportunity to participate in the lives of others with grace, with ministering presence, and to hold the hands of strangers. Thank you.